the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, October the 27th, 2023. I'm going to start again. Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, October the 27th, 2024. Get the year right. Yesterday, we did an interesting That Was the Week summary of our tech business, and we focused on AI, as we tend to do in AI, and we ran our show through Google LM, and this is what the bots told us about the show.
Deep dive into the world of tech.
It's been another crazy week.
It really has. And this week, we're focusing on the theme of AI.
Yeah, specifically how AI is becoming more than just a tool.
Right. It's becoming almost like an independent actor.
An independent actor. In other words, OpenAI is acquiring its own mind, its own consciousness. Our guest today on the show has given a lot of thought to this. Terrence J. Sejnowski is one of America's leading scientists when it comes to technology and AI. He has a new book out on Tuesday, ChatGPT and the Future of AI, the Deep Language Revolution. He's very much on the pioneer of this as a scientist himself. And he's joining us from La Jolla in Southern California. Terry, congratulations on the new book. This notion of AI as a independent actor, is it something we should be taking seriously, or is it just more existential hysteria from the critics of the tech world?
Well, I think it was a great surprise 2 years ago when OpenAI released ChatGPT for the public. It, was a wake-up call. However, to put things in perspective, it was as if an alien landed on the earth and started talking to us in English. Now, the only thing that you could be sure of is that it wasn't human. So it's not human, then what is it? It talks like an agent. It answers questions. But, we actually don't know quite what to make of it scientifically. We don't really understand how it is able to answer questions. We certainly didn't program it to do that. We just trained it up on an enormous amount of data, the world's database. And what was amazing, and this is, the magic sauce for these neural network models, deep learning, is the fact that you can learn from experience, so like the human brain. And in the case of ChatGPT, it was just trained to predict the next word in the sentence. I mean, this is not a huge, it's unsupervised. You don't have to label anything. It gets better and better and better and better. And now it has enormous range in terms of knowledge base, but it's not human, and so it can mimic some things that we do, but we don't know how the brain works either. So it's a difficult question to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a rather dumb question, Terry. Are we human? I mean, what does even that word mean? We did a show with Robert Skidelsky, the great biographer of John Maynard Keynes recently. He has a new book out, Mindless, The Human Condition in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. He was a wonderful interview, but I have to admit that any book titles with words like the human condition always make me a little skeptical. Is it a valuable term? Should we be talking about it in the context of anything, particularly AI?
Well, here's something that we've learned. With the experts are they disagree very strongly on whether these large language models are intelligent, whether they understand language, and whether they have a mind. Right? I mean, these are all.
Well, but Terry, you're not answering the question, and maybe because it's not a question that can be answered. Is the word human condition, does it have any value?
Well, I was just about to get to that. Thank you for putting me back on track. Human condition is another one of these words that we use and we think we understand it. But I think what you're getting to is that different people mean different things by it. And this, different conditions could mean different things. It's every word is ambiguous. Every word has, if you look up in the dictionary, many meanings, and you have to use the context to figure out which meaning is appropriate. But even like a word like intelligent, there's a spectrum of different intelligences. I mean, there's different kinds of intelligence. There's emotional intelligence. There's very, but even within emotional intelligence is a range. Some people have fantastic emotional intelligence. Some have almost none. So here you go. Where's ChatGPT? It's somewhere in the middle of all of this. It's not quite this. It's not. Maybe it's even on its own spectrum. Who knows?
I should have done this, Terry, for the show. I apologize for not doing it. But if we ran the question to OpenAI, to ChatGPT, or to Anthropic, or to Notebook LLM, what the human condition is, what answer would we get?
I haven't done that, but what I have discovered, and by the way, in my book, I use it in order to, first of all, answer questions like that, to give a demonstration of what kinds of responses that we get from ChatGPT, and I put them in a box so you can see what's mine and what's ChatGPT. But my overall impression is that it does a fantastically good job. I even asked it what's intelligence, and it had a very detailed of explanation of how different people use that word, and where it's misused. It's really quite good at this. But it has, I would say, very broad, but not very deep. It's not like it's a philosopher that can go down and analyze the fine details of what's like the word consciousness is a good example of that. It's there are hundreds of books written on consciousness, and if you look it up in a dictionary, what you find is a bunch of words. You look up those words, you get a bunch. It's all self-referential, right? The whole thing.
Yeah. So it seems like sometimes when you talk to these AIs, they just seem to be saying what we want to hear or what it thinks we want to hear.
You put your finger on something. Okay. So it took me a while to figure out what could be the reason why people have such different reactions to their experience with ChatGPT. And what I discovered was that it was a mirror. It was mirroring the person that was asking the questions. Now, it's absorbed the world's knowledge. I mean, it's amazing what it knows about the brain, for example. I mean, I'm an expert in this area, but it knows a lot. And when you talk with it, it can take any persona. I mean, any one of it's read novels or Wuthering Heights, right? It's all of these authors have different characters with different personas, and it's absorbed them all. So it can adopt. You can ask it to adopt any one of those. By the way, it does a pretty good job of mimicking them, characters in novels. But you can ask it. I asked it once to be a neuroscientist and to summarize one of my abstracts for a 10-year-old. It did it much better than I could. But this mirror principle is really interesting. If you ask it a stupid question, I've noticed this, it gives you a stupid answer. I mean, it really sounds like it's clueless. And this is something that actually I came across. It actually intrigued me. It was an article in The Economist, and they gave two different people. They asked the question, what do you think? And one of them asked a very sophisticated question about theory of mind, and it gave beautiful responses. I mean, it passed that test. And another one, I'm not giving the names here, but the other one asked it a question like, how long did it take to move the Golden Gate Bridge across Egypt, right? I mean, it was crazy. It hallucinated. It said, well, it took 2 months, and October 7th, 1952. And, I mean, it sounds like, it doesn't have any clue. Doesn't have common sense, doesn't understand. Well, I took the same question and I preface it with saying, if a question is nonsense, say nonsense. So I gave it the same question and it came right back. This is a nonsense question, right? So it really depends how you prompt it. It depends on how you set up your dialogue. It's really, like I say, it's different from talking to a human. It has very different.
Well, I don't know if it is. I mean, hallucination. A lot of people are talking about how OpenAI's tool hallucinates, but I'm sure you've heard, Terry, there's an election coming up in the US. I don't want to turn this into another political discussion, but aren't the political candidates, especially in American politics, aren't they trying to do the same thing as ChatGPT? Aren't they mirrors? Aren't they trying to, whatever they're trying to say, especially with their language, they use language in different ways. Aren't they trying to mirror whoever's asking that question?
Well, that's an interesting insight. In other words, humans can also have this. In other words, if I'm trying to influence some group, right? If I mirror their thought, their beliefs, and what they're thinking, I probably could have more influence than if I, rejected and made fun of them, right? It's just what's happening right now is is bizarre. I really can't really explain. And you're right about the fact that humans have many of the failings. By the way, the hallucination in medicine is called confabulation, and there are diseases where people just make things up. Korsakoff syndrome is one of those, and it's for advanced alcoholism. But hallucination is also a kind of a creativity, right? It's doing something, it's creating something from whole cloth. It's very plausible. That's what it's amazing. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole sort of a cultural movement built around men like William Burroughs on that theme.
Yes, that's right. So and writers are using these capabilities to create new plots or new characters, and and scientists are using it too, by the way, to help them with designing experiments and coming up with new hypotheses. Colleagues of mine here at the Salk. It's one of the things. There are things that surprised me. Yeah, and there'll be many more of these. One of the surprises is that when given a choice between having a human cognitive therapist and an AI therapist, the majority of humans pick the AI.
And I wonder whether, again, when historians look back at this period where clearly AI is changing the world, that it won't be purely coincidental, Terry, that our therapeutic age is also our age of AI. The two seem oddly, eerily connected.
Yeah, how is that? What's going on here? This is a transition. It's no doubt about that we're going through this period where new things are becoming possible. We don't know where it's heading. There's a lot of uncertainty. It reminds me a lot of the Wright brothers. The early days where airplanes were just getting off the ground. The first flight of the Wright brothers was 10 feet up and about 100 feet ahead, and it took a lot of trial and error to get there, and it took a lot of incremental advances. By the way, the most difficult thing that had to be solved, the problem that was the most important, was how to control the airplane, how to get it to do what you want, direction you want to go without crashing, and that was reminiscent of what's happening now with AI, is that we want to be able to make sure that it doesn't do anything bad. You know, we need to regulate it. How do you regulate it? We're just figuring that out.
Yeah, I hope you're right on the comparison with the history of aviation, because it seems as if aviation is one of those industries that are actually a lot safer than other ones. Maybe we can come back to that later. The subtitle of your book, Terry, is The Deep Language Revolution. Before we get specifically to OpenAI and these large language models, I mean, again, maybe this is a rather broad question, but in your view, you're a big time scientist, you're a behavioral scientist. How intimately is language bound up with who we are as a species? I mean, there was a time before, of course, we had language. I'm not sure scientists necessarily agree about how language arose, but is it our unique contribution? I mean, to borrow the subtitle of the Sejnowski book, is the human condition itself, if there is such a thing, is it bound up in the existence of language?
You know, that's a really deep question, and of course, it's unique to our species. But is it really the most important? If you ask most people, they'll probably say yes. It is the most important difference that we have. But I've actually come to think that, well, first of all, language is very recent, and it evolved by taking small changes here and there in the brain of the primate that we started with, our ancestors, the chimp, and so it really is taking advantage of existing mechanisms, memory mechanisms, motor mechanisms, sensory motor, but you know, getting them into a much bigger brain, because we have a much larger brain for our body size. So, and I think there are other things that also were improved, and one of them is the speed of learning. So we not only do we have a much larger memory store because we have a bigger cortex, but also we can fill it much faster. We learn much faster. You know, in fact, we have in some cases one trial learning, where you know you only have to get one example, and you know you can start using that new concept or the new word. And that's really quite remarkable compared to when we want to train a monkey, for example, to do a vision experiment. It takes weeks and months. Well, part of it is that you can't talk to the monkey, but even you think the monkey would pick it up. You know, you're doing it every day, over and over and over again. So, but to go back to your question, language is actually a two-edged sword. You know, you can use it to communicate. That's good. But you can also use it to lie. You can use it to get people to do things for you. That and you can you can really have using rhetoric. You know, you could convince people of things. You know, conspiracy theories.
No one would ever do that, would they, Terry?
Oh well, of course, none of my friends. But you know, I don't know. But you know, the beliefs are very look at religions. You know, I mean, it's more, religion is a set of beliefs, and it binds people together. It allows people to have a common reference frame. But there's a lot of things that happen in religion which are aren't necessarily for the best. The way that sometimes we I remember, this is a long time ago, my mother was trying to get me to be a good boy. And I asked why. Am I, I was expecting a reward. And she said, Terry, you're going to get your reward in heaven. Right.
Well, that was a good question and a good answer.
Well, it was a good, it was, it is how we interact with each other. We make things up, and we believe things, and so forth. Okay, now, but here's what's the most important thing about language, and it's something that's even more recent. a few 10,000, maybe 10, 20,000 years ago, writing was invented. It's not innate. Writing is something humans invented. It's a technology. It's a tool.
Well, language we invented too. I mean, isn't it?
Language is something that is we didn't invent it in the sense that we made it up. The humans evolved to communicate in a certain way. By the way, the articulation that's going on in your mouth when you talk is incredibly precise, and it involves many muscles timed with millisecond resolution, and that is the most acrobatic thing that humans do. And that had to evolve because other animals, if you listen to them, I mean, they don't make all these very complex sounds. The only example where they come close is the bird song. And there's a lot of similarity because the birds also learn the song from their father. So, but given that we have something that's oral, right? The big leap was to be able to write it down, and for two reasons. First, you could transmit that from generation to generation more accurately. Otherwise, you have to have an oral tradition where you have bards who go tell stories. But the second thing that's important is that you can write things down and you can improve it. You can correct it. You can, and this is how science evolved, was through generation upon generation of adding and improving and testing, developing new tools, and you can accumulate knowledge that way. Otherwise, you're stuck with very primitive tools. You're very primitive things that you have to work with, like agriculture, but once you can write down, things that have worked in the past to help, get better crops, and what time you should be planting and so forth, and different parts of the earth, different types of crops, all of that detail now can be passed on.
But I wonder how helpful it is. You mentioned your mother telling you that if you behaved yourself, you asked her why you should behave yourself. She said if you did, you'd go to heaven. Not everyone would be convinced by that. Language isn't always very convincing. I went to your Wikipedia page and it noted that Sejnowski was born in Cleveland in 1947. If I just told our audience that about you, they wouldn't have any idea of how you became one of the world's leading authorities on large language models and on technology. You may one day even get the Nobel Prize. You've won all sorts of awards. How does language help us understand the world then?
It's language is, in a sense, a way for us to this is a hypothesis that not just me, but a lot of other people, Pat Churchland, who I have collaborated with, she's a philosopher, but she's written books about this. It evolved probably for us to be able to be social, and we are a social species, to be able to work together in groups, to hunt together, being able to plan ahead, for example. So when I was a graduate student, actually, I was a graduate student in physics at Princeton, but I took a course in philosophy. And it was all about one question, which is, what comes first, language or thought? And
who was offering? Who ran the seminar?
Oh my God! Oh, you're asking something that happened, like 40 or 50 years ago. I'll have to think about that one. I do have my notes.
I mean, it wasn't someone famous like I don't know. No, I was going to say Keynes, Einstein, or someone like that.
No. This was a philosopher teaching a graduate course, but this was his field, right? So I couldn't. It's amazing you can have a whole course on that one question, but we'd be surprised how far, once you start digging, how far you can go. But in some ways, having language means that you can think more analytically, you can reason, you can begin to dissect things more finally, and so at the end, there wasn't any real conclusion, because how do you know? And you don't know what thinking is. How does the brain think, or how does the brain create language? The two obviously are intertwined in some way, and they kind of are synergistic, and we are able to enhance what we can do with language. It's a tool. By the way, this is also something that people are confused. They think, oh, all these language models, that they're agents. These are agents like us. That's really may be true, but they're also tools. Very very sophisticated cognitive tools, and new tools. You have to know how to use them. And the example I like to give is, suppose that you could take a shovel back to the dark ages, maybe before, right? And we're talking about maybe when we were in the savannah, and we didn't have maybe we had fire and maybe spears and so forth, but you give them a real shovel, nice advanced shovel with a nice sharp pick, and then before that, if you wanted to dig a hole, right, you basically, it's a very complex process, or maybe you use a stick or something. But with a shovel, it's much more efficient. But you have to know how to use the shovel, right? If you use the wrong end, it's not going to work. So with the same thing with these large language models, is that they're tools, and if you know how to use them, you're going to get much more out of it than if you just
Although knowing how to use a tool is a complicated thing. I mean, I was thinking of the machine gun, taking a machine gun back to the Middle Ages. You could use it to kill lots of people, or you could use it to stop other people killing others. So there's all sorts of different ways you could use tools. Terry, you noted earlier, you're not the first or the last person, I think, to say this, and you're very honest and humble, I think, as a great scientist, that you were surprised by the appearance of ChatGPT 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of people have said that. But the way you're presenting all this, it suggests to me that even if large language models are in their own sense, the narrative is surprising of how they caught on and how compelling they are. It's not really that new. It's part of the narrative of human history, of philosophy, of trying to figure out our relations as humans, whatever that means, with language, whatever that means. So in a sense, it's just another chapter in this ongoing story. Is that fair?
Oh, I think that's the right way to put it, because we've had technologies before that are kind of precursors. We can record things, we can record videos and so forth. And this is just now what we're doing, is we're taking all of that and putting it into a machine that now it's like a super Google search. Now, it's going to enhance what we are capable of doing, but it's not. Our brain isn't changing, right? We're still going to have the same brain. It's just that we have more better ways of being able to access knowledge and to incorporate it into our job, whatever that is. But that having been said, it is a chapter, and it hasn't been written yet. But science is 10 years ahead. Scientists have been using these deep learning models and we have solved now several problems that were thought to be impossible. And the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was given for the breakthrough in predicting how proteins fold. So protein,
and that course went to 2 people at Google DeepMinds.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. DeepMind, Dennis Sabis, who is the founder. By the way, he has a PhD in neuroscience, so he had already predisposed in that direction. But also David Baker, who is a card-carrying molecular geneticist who's been trying for his whole life to work on that problem. And it was solved by learning from existing protein structures to predict new ones. And this is something, again, that was thought to be so difficult that it would never be accomplished. And it's having a transformative effect on drug design, for example. Before, it was a lot of trial and error and intuition, and now you can, what would happen if I changed this amino acid? Now we just put it through the AlphaFold, and it tells us, and so it's like it makes things go much faster.
This year's Nobel Prize for Physics was given to your friend Geoffrey Hinton, and a fellow AI researcher, the man who perhaps is most associated with certainly Google's breakthrough. He was working for Google at the time, and then OpenAI developed it. What is, and this is your area, Terry, you're not a philosopher, you're a scientist. ChatGPT and the future of AI, how central is Hinton and his, I think were they a Montreal-based team, or certainly a Canada-based team in the development of this? Is Hinton the central figure? He wasn't the only person to be given the Nobel Prize. I know you've worked with him, and in his interview in the New York Times, he even references you working with John Hopefield, another of the important figures in all this.
Right. So I'll give you a little bit of the history. It's in the book, by the way, if you're interested, the origin story. But John Hopefield was my PhD thesis advisor, my mentor at Princeton. And we were getting interested in neuroscience at the same time. He was already a distinguished physicist in condensed matter and in biophysics. But
this is Hopefield, not Hinton.
I'm talking about Hopefield. Okay. Hopefield also got.
Yeah, Hopefield. Right.
Okay. At Princeton. And so Jeff and I were collaborating at the time. This is in the early 80s. And we heard John give a lecture about his Hopefield network. And we were intrigued because we're trying to solve a problem with optimization problem of trying to find the best solution to a problem. And Hopefield had this network, which had, it was a model for memory where you can store memories in local minima. And we wanted to find the global minima. So what we did was we heated up the network, and you do that by adding noise. And then you gradually cool it. That's called annealing. And then lo and behold, it worked. And so we said, wow, thank God that John came up with this model, because I'm not sure we would have ever been able to solve the optimization problem. It's a very complex, optimization is very complex if you don't have a single minimum. Now, the surprise, and this is something that really solved a problem that had been outstanding for literally 2 decades. We discovered a learning algorithm for the Boltzmann machine, which we named it after a physicist who created statistical mechanics, which is really what makes the Boltzmann machine work. And this learning algorithm was the first time that you could train a network that had these hidden layers between the input and the output. Before that, you could only train one layer. And suddenly, that just basically set off a boom. Literally within the next 2 or 3 years, there were a bunch of other learning algorithms, and one in particular that we're still using today is called backpropagation of error. You see what the output is. If there's an error, you twiddle all the weights to make them better next time through, and you keep doing it over and over. And Jeff was one of the co-authors in that paper with Dave Rumelhart. And so,
and what year was that? Was that about 2011, something like that?
No. That backprop goes back to the 80s, 1986. It was an article in Nature. Ours, the Boltzmann machine learning algorithm was in 85, although we had actually discovered it.
Well, so we're talking about 40 years ago. So it's taken, and correct me if I'm wrong, Terry. I can tell you're not shy to do that. But there are a lot of trial and error, a lot of scientific cul-de-sacs. I mean, Hinton was with Google, and Google hadn't been the one who developed ChatGPT. It was OpenAI. So no one quite knew what was happening. Is that fair?
No, we knew exactly what was happening in the following sense. I mean, of course, you don't really know where things are heading. What we didn't know back then was how well it would scale. As it got bigger and bigger, as computers got faster and faster, And we just didn't know until it actually got to the point big enough, the networks are big enough so that you could solve these difficult problems. And that occurred about 2010. And that's when Jeff and his students cracked a problem that was very difficult, which is recognizing objects and images. And it was because a huge data set had gotten put together with 20
Right.
million.
But at that point, Jeff was still at Google. Is that correct?
Jeff was, yeah, he I think that, no, he was at Toronto in 2010.
So this was before he sold his startup to Google. Is that right?
He actually started a small company with his two students who were with ImageNet. In fact, the company was sold to Google during that year when he was at the NeurIPS meeting. So the biggest AI meeting, it takes place every year in December. It's called Neural Information Processing Systems. I'm the president of the foundation that runs that meeting, and I have for the last 30 years. But I saw this happen. I mean, it was really, under my watch. But Jeff, they sold the company just after actually, I think that talk was in 2012. And
and he's called, of course, the godfather of AI. I'm not sure if he likes that term, given.
Well, there were a lot of godfathers. All successes have many fathers.
Would you consider yourself a godfather of all this?
No, I'm not a godfather. I'm.
You're someone who follows one of the godfathers. So is it ironic, Terry, that even though Google acquired Jeff Hinton's startup in 2010-11, when he developed the technology that would go on to become essential, LLM technology that would become essential to ChatGPT, that Google didn't develop this technology, that they missed the biggest opportunity, perhaps, arguably, in the history of technology? It's weird, isn't it?
It really is. And they're not the only big company that missed. IBM missed it. Microsoft missed it. But actually, there's a real irony here, because Google actually had one of the biggest and best machine learning groups in the world, Deep Pockets, and it was a small group of I think seven of these researchers developed the transformer. The transformer is a particular architecture that's used in these large language models.
Yeah, that word is often used as a kind of, I guess, a shorthand, non-scientific shorthand to describe what's happened.
Well, it's an interesting word. It did transform AI in some ways. But what interesting, what happened was that they actually showed that it could be used to improve, the chatbots, and Google decided not to pursue it. And they went off, and all of them now, all seven have startups that are worth billions. I mean,
it's incredible. It's all those companies like Yahoo that turned down the opportunity to acquire Google in 1998. The history tends to repeat itself. So why is it, Terry, and I know you covered this in the book, why is it that OpenAI pioneered it? Often people associate Sam Altman with OpenAI, but there were many other very powerful figures. Is there someone within OpenAI that can be credited with really pioneering an application of Jeff Hinton's transformer technology that resulted in ChatGPT? Who do we credit with this?
Okay, so very interesting history here. So the person, I mean, Sam is a great businessman, but he's not a machine learning person. So, but that's okay, because you need people with different talents to add to the pot. But the one person I know who was really instrumental in going for what's called artificial general intelligence, AGI, was Ilya Sutskever. So I mentioned before that Jeff had this company, this small startup. It consisted of him and his two graduate students, and one of them was Ilya. And Ilya became the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and he was the one that drove this whole thing, right? I mean, he was responsible. Well, he knew about transformers because that was already invented. But what they realized, the breakthrough really was when they took the transformer that had come from Google, and then they got enough data to be able to scale it up.
Mm.
And at that point, it started doing something that no other deep learning network was able to do. No, okay, all of the deep learning networks before that were dedicated to one task, like object recognition. That was one network. You trained it on a huge number of images. Then there's speech recognition. You train it on a lot of speech. It all has to be labeled. Very expensive because it has to be done by humans, all the labeling of the objects in the image. In any case, what happened was that they discovered that this, if you train this transformer to predict the next word, once it gets big enough, you can now ask it to do other things. You can ask it to, for example, write computer programs. It never had been taught to write a program. I mean, but it absorbed lots of programs along with lots of words. And so it could do something called a one-shot learning. And it's not a form of learning, really. It's one-shot ability to take on a new class of problems, like summarize the text. Right? It never had been taught to summarize text. There's no separate program. It just turns out that it was so good at language, and it apparently understands what it means to summarize. How else could it have done it? And it could do all these different tasks, right? It's much more general than just one narrow task. It really, in language, natural language processing, it really is very, very broad, and that's why it's so useful. So that's really where OpenAI opened the door. They were the ones that figured this out, that this was going to be a really important and useful tool for many, many, many different problems.
You've introduced the language, the words "one shot." For you, people always remember where they were when JFK was shot. To find who they were, people often associate also where they were when the planes crashed into the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. Do you remember where you were, where you first saw the potential of ChatGPT? Were you utterly amazed? I've talked to Toby Walsh, another AI expert in Australia. He acknowledged complete amazement when he first saw ChatGPT. Were you equally amazed, or were you not surprised?
Yes and no. Okay, so it was actually available to academics several years ahead of time, and it wasn't nearly as good when the first version came out. GPT-2 and GPT-3 were incrementally better. So the first time through, it wasn't as good as it is now. However, it is true. I don't remember where I was, but I remember that the thing that surprised me the most was how quickly it came back. Right. In other words, I asked it some complicated question or something, and bang, 2 seconds later, there's a whole page. And of course, it took months and months of computer time. We're talking here about tens of thousands of these.
What year approximately was that? Was about 3 or 4 years ago?
Let's see. It was back in 19. Let's see. No, not 19. 20. Yeah, it was probably around 2020, sometime around then. But the thing that, like I say, that it was actually reading a economics. It was an article in The Economist, and the author, which was about large language models, but the author at the end it acknowledged the fact that he had used ChatGPT to write the paper, write this article. And I said, "Whoa, okay, that's it. Now this is going to have, people are beginning to use it. Professionals, students are beginning to use it. That's so that really was a transition for me, is when I saw that it was going to go beyond outside of the academic community." And
what was your emotional reaction, Terry? The hairs on your neck stand up. Were you chilled, excited, scared? Mixture of all three.
I was elated. I was like, this is what we dreamed of back in the 1980s, 40 years ago, right? But okay, you have to understand, we were outsiders. We were not in the mainstream of AI. Jeff and I were, we were. In fact, they laughed at us. The people in AI.
So were you elated because you were proved right, or you were elated because you just thought this was just so amazing?
It was a combination. It's a combination. It's like your baby grows up and it does something amazing, right? I mean, it's like you're proud. You're a
You
baby.
say you were proud of the technology as if it was your baby.
It was our baby. Come on, we invented this stuff back in the 1980s, right? The kernel, at least, obviously, it had to grow, and so do babies. Has to grow, and it has to take in lots of data, lots of information, and then grows into an adult. I have to say that Jeff and I, we were very ignored. We were ignored. Actually, they didn't take us seriously back in the 1980s, and they didn't. Actually, it turned out like I'll tell you what happened. It was a neural network, was very hot in the 80s, but then it was a neural network winter from the 90s and the early 2000s.
Yeah, the AI winter is
That's
called.
right. It was, but it is even more for us, okay? Because we couldn't solve the difficult problems. But there was a group in Canada. Jeff was at the University of Toronto, called CFAR, Center for Advanced Institute, Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CFAR. And what it does is it funds groups of people on specific scientific topics. And this was a topic that was organized around neural network learning, and it was, while it was coming, computers were getting faster and faster. And this was really that group. And they've all become major figures in all the companies now, right? And I mean, Jeff and his students, and all the people who worked in those decades. That, by the way, that's his house in Toronto. And
yeah, for people listening, we have a picture of Jeff on the New York Times picture, standing on his veranda.
Yes, and I have to tell you that was the best time of my life back in the 80s. It was just exciting. We were so really, we were laying the foundations, and we were solving small problems, toy problems. But at least we demonstrated that it was we were making progress, and that was, and I also it has an architecture that's similar to the brain. In fact, the only reason why we felt that we were heading in the right direction was that the only existence proof that you could solve any of those problems was that nature had solved them. So let's pop the hood. Let's figure out what are the principles. How did nature figure this out? And the principles were massively parallel. Lots of interconnections between the units, like neurons. The connections are called weights in the simplified neural network model. And then the secret sauce was the learning algorithms, and that really has now become modern AI. All the things that we dreamed about back in the 80s, really, it took that long, though. And I remember I was in Montreal. This was probably about 15, 20 years ago. I was welcoming 10,000 people, right, who were coming now to the NeurIPS meeting. And I said 30 years ago, I could never have imagined, welcoming so many of you. How many of you are here for the first time? And of course, half of them were, right, because there's so many people there. And I said, look, back, then, I thought it would only take 10 years, and here we are 30 years later. And, you can't predict these things. You just don't know. We didn't know how much computing you needed. We didn't know whether it would actually solve any difficult problem.
But yeah, I wonder if your mother knew what would happen. She would have answered your question about doing good differently when you were a child.
I have to say that I had some of I was very fortunate to have a family that really supported me, the direction that I wanted to go, and helped me. And I know that not everybody's this fortunate, but I really do appreciate having, now looking back, this is a wonderful childhood and upbringing.
Terry, you didn't win the Nobel Prize, but you've won all sorts of other awards. You just got a very, very prestigious honorary degree from your alma mater, Princeton. You've won all sorts of other awards for your work. Not so much you personally. I mean, obviously, it's nice to win awards, but do you think that the chemistry prize this year was given, the Nobel Prize for chemistry was given to a Deep Minds team? Hinton won the physics Nobel Prize. Do you think all this is appropriate? All these awards on pioneer AI scientists like yourself and Hinton and Hassabis?
Well, so computer science did not exist when Nobel created his prizes, right? And neither did neuroscience. And so we're making prizes up. I won the Brain Prize this year, by the way, which is the highest prize. It's like the Turing Prize that Jeff won.
You also got the Gruber Prize. You've won all the prizes.
Well, okay. So,
are there any prizes that you haven't won, Terry, except for the Nobel Prize?
Well, okay. So let me just finish the AI prizes, the ones that were given just a couple of weeks ago. So I think what happened with the reason why those two prizes went to both the pioneering work and the example of an application of AI is that it recognizes that we now have this new tool. It originated from physicists. I'm a PhD physicist, right? John Hopfield is a PhD physicist, right? We were the ones who got neural networks off the ground, and not the only ones, but I'm saying that the lineage taking us back to the beginning, right, is a direct lineage, and computer science. And computer science, again, it was the von Neumann architecture was the only game in town. I mean, it was it dominates, your personal computer, supercomputers, and so forth. But now what's happening is that we have an architecture that runs on massively parallel hardware. NVIDIA is now a $3 trillion company that does, graphics processing, those GPUs. I mean, it's a whole computer science and hardware and software has now just been thrown into a whole new era in terms of what you can do with the hardware and, specialized hardware. So, so I think that was very appropriate for those prizes to be given. And I think that, both John and Jeff were extremely deserving. Jeff really is one of my best friends, and we bonded. We have this history, and so he went off into computer science, and I went off into neuroscience, and I'm still working on the problem of understanding the brain. So I have a lot more work that needs to be done.
Well, when you speak to Jeff, I don't know if you'll remember me. I met him in the 1990s. His sister is married to a close friend of mine. So,
oh, really?
And I know he's a big Tottenham Hotspur fan. And when I met him, he had to lie on the floor because he had a very bad back.
Yeah,
I assume his back hasn't got any better.
It has, actually. He used to be the case. He couldn't travel in an airplane because he couldn't sit down.
Yeah, he had to lie. Final question, Terry. This is a wonderful interview, and I appreciate your openness on this. You've mentioned that when you first saw the potential success of ChatGPT, you were elated, you were proud. It was your baby. It was like having a child. But of course, that child now is beginning to grow up. A lot of the original scientists, certainly at OpenAI, who developed ChatGPT, have left. Sam Altman's running the show now. More and more disturbing news about some of this technology. There was a piece in The Intercept about how the US military is confirming the purchase of OpenAI warfighting forces. I mean, you mentioned the comparison with the Wright brothers and the history of flying, but couldn't one also compare this with the invention of nuclear technology or atomic technology? Lots of movies have been made about this. Are you as proud today in 2024 as you were in 2020? And do you have any moral concerns, qualms about the direction of deep language technology?
Well, of course I am, and so is the whole field. By the way, I mean it's ethics and uh, there's every technology can be used for good and bad, and also for evil. And you gave some good examples. Nuclear technology that can be used for good and bad. Fortunately, we're able to control it, to regulate it, and I'm hoping that we'll do the same with this technology. It's no different in that
Well, of
respect.
course, though, and as the Oppenheimer movie showed, nuclear technology has been used already in war, so it's a little bit more complicated than
It
that. But
it
go on.
it it is, but you learn from your mistakes, okay? And, but the real danger in right now in my mind is really what if a bad actor gets a hold of AI and now it begins to use it for nefarious reasons. It's just Oppenheimer. That's a really relevant comparison because he was very troubled after it had been
Yeah, well,
demonstrated.
that's the point of the film, of course.
Yes, he was canceled. Maybe now using a term that we use for literally, it canceled his life. They canceled his life because he would not play ball with the people that were designing the next generation, the hydrogen bomb, Teller in particular. But I think you're right that we should be concerned, and I'm glad that there are people out there who are worried about the worst case scenarios. Super intelligence. Jeffrey Hinton,
Yeah.
my good friend, has been one of those, the most vocal in terms of what could happen, and he's very smart. Here's what his reasoning. He says, "Look, it can write computer programs. What if it started writing computer programs to make itself smarter? Where would it be? It would just leave us in the dust." And that's not going to happen. Uh, next year or maybe even 10 years from now, but someday it's certainly a possibility. So we should be concerned and be cautious, and that's exactly what I have. The approach I've taken is to try to mitigate the bad parts, and that'll be done. These are technical engineering problems mostly, but
Well,
how?
they're also, but let's end on that problem. I mean, they're more than just engineering problems, Terry. They're political problems, they're cultural problems, there are economic problems. Now, OpenAI, I think, has been valued at $150 billion. It's a private company. Sam Altman, for better or worse, is taking it as in that direction. What would you like to see? One or two, perhaps, regulations or political initiatives that will address these things, because they don't happen naturally.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, there's another example that we could use, which is there was a meeting when the molecular genetics tools became possible to manipulate genes. There was a very important meeting at Silomar that brought together all of the leaders in biology, and they said, look, if we don't regulate ourselves right now, it's going to be done in a heavy-handed way by the government. And so what they did was something that was really smart. They said, we're going to have containment facilities. So when you do an experiment, it's going to be in a room that is the pressure and with all of the precautions so nothing gets out, and there's different levels. And that really was what was needed, was something that was thoughtful, careful way to prevent the worst case from happening. And I think that was a good thing I think that's what we should be doing. I'm talking about us now, not the government. We should be self-regulating, and we're beginning, and there are some of us that are trying to do that, but it's difficult because it's the big companies, of course, who have the resources that can move it forward. But I think that's all going to change. I think that now that these language models are coming out, there's dozens and dozens of them. Small language models are coming out for specific companies, for example, or specific problems like education. And this is maybe the future. The future is going to be that it'll be more democratic. It won't depend on these big companies, and that we can self-regulate it within our own communities. And so maybe that's one way, but we'll see how that works out.
I hope you're right, Terry, although judging from the last 50 years of computing history, winner-take-all economy and technology, the chances of that don't seem to be particularly convincing. But anyway, I appreciate your openness. And I have to ask a final question, Terry. It comes back to your mom. You've done good work in your life, and now you want your baby to grow up to be a responsible human being. Do you think you're going to be rewarded by going to heaven?
I am, very, very unknown. Put it this way: there's no evidence for heaven. There's no evidence against it. There are things that there are mysteries in the universe. When I started out, I was working in relativistic astrophysics, and I would look up at the stars, and I have a sense of wonder about all of the amazing galaxies, and I worked with John Wheeler, who was a very, very legendary physicist who coined the term black hole, and I was working on black holes. And there are wondrous things in the universe, and I think we're just scratching the surface. And where it all go and our place in it, who knows?
Who knows? I would say, Terry, that I will see you again in heaven, but I won't, because I'm certainly not going to get there. I'm guessing you might. But Terrence Sejnowski, for the moment, on Earth at least, author of ChatGPT and the Future of AI. Wonderful conversation covering so much of what's happened in AI and large language models. You were on the front lines. You were there when it happened. Real honor to talk, Terry. We'll get you back on the show to talk more, because this is only the beginning of that story.
I enjoyed your questions, and I wish I had better answers.